my Lords, can I join others in welcoming the Noble Lord the Minister to his new role and thanking the Right Reverend Prelate, the Bishop of St Albans, for securing this important debate. Now, I joined your Lordship's house after speaking at a medical conference, and speaking to a senior doctor there, I mentioned where I was heading to next, and he said to me, well, I bet to myself that whenever I switch on the television, I'm going to see a gambling advert. And that reflected the kind of concerns. He wasn't just making a joke, he was also expressing concerns about the public health aspect of the gambling industry, and particularly gambling advertising, that so many Noble Lords have already referred to. Now, at that medical conference, I was talking about the pharmaceutical industry, quoting a former editor of the New England Journal of Medicine, described the pharmaceutical industry as being like an 800-pound gorilla in terms of its political impact. I think that might also be quite a good metaphor for the lobbying power of the gambling industry, and if we set perhaps the two set against each other, well, we'd probably see quite a bit of betting on the result, and it might be quite a close one. Now, the Noble Lord, Lord Smith, said the industry is being a little more responsible. Well, I think that probably is quite the right adjective when you look at the list of annual donations to Gamble Aware, published in April this year, that being the industry-funded addiction charity. And there's a number of remarkably small donations from very large groups. And just to pick out one of them, the Philippines-based W88, which is a football shirt sponsor for a major football team, which is operating through the controversial white label system. It donated £250. And that was a sum that was succeeded by quite a large list of local hospices, local Red Cross groups, who'd done things like held cake stalls and raised money to help problem gamblers. And here's a very large industry company putting in 250 quid. Now, I find myself, perhaps slightly to my surprise, in following the Noble Lord, Lord Robotham, rather agreeing with what he said about advertising. It happens. And I want to direct members of your Lordship's House to an article just published in the Times from the Hampshire cricketer Chris Wood, who I think with great bravery has come out and spoken about his problem with gambling addiction, identifying that he's lost around £200,000. So I think sometimes we talk about this as being and of course gambling does have massive impacts on poorer areas of societies and poorer communities, but this is a problem right through our communities. And Chris Wood identifies explicitly the problem of advertising, and particularly advertising during football games, as something that he found really hard to fight against. Now, I think if we look about what's happening around Europe, Sweden is proposing bringing in restrictions on gambling parallel to their already tight restrictions on alcohol advertising. Portugal has just brought in a ban on TV and radio advertising between 7 a.m. and 10:30 p.m. So I'm not sure if the Noble Lord the Minister, being new, has quite yet acquired the yellow stick-it note that I'm sure is on all ministers' computer terminals that says, must say world leading in every sentence. But if the Noble Lord the Minister has, I would strongly suggest that he really should not be using it here, because we are definitely on a word scale trailing in our controls on this out-of-control industry. And I think it's particularly interesting that so many nations are tying together alcohol and gambling industry advertising, because what this review demonstrates is that alcohol consumption is strongly associated with gambling. And that's obviously a problem. And the Noble Lord, Lord Robotham, spoke about leaving it to individual responsibility. But that is obviously a particular problem when you combine gambling opportunities with alcohol. Now, I want to particularly build on the comments of the Noble Lord, Lord Foster of Bath, talking about the impacts, and also indeed the Noble Lord, Lord Seeker, talking about the impacts on children and young people. Now, the review again tells us that the rates of gambling, much of which of course is technically illegal, is higher than using e-cigarettes, smoking tobacco cigarettes, or taking illegal drugs. We have, in some cases, very, very tight legal restrictions on those three groups of activities, of harmful activities to young people. Surely our controls on gambling, particularly as affecting young people, should be on a similar scale. And talking about young people, I particularly want to raise the issue of loot boxes. And this is an issue which we've talked about quite a bit in Your Lordship's House, but we've really failed to see any government action. And I was looking at some figures on the Ultimate Team FIFA games, and research there has shown a robustly verified link between loot boxes and problem gambling. And if we look at the players of this game from a UK consumer survey, 31% of 13 to 15-year-olds had played the title. 31% of 13 to 15-year-olds. So this really is a public health issue, and particularly a children and young people's issue. Now finally, I just want to briefly mention a comment made by the Right Reverend Prelate, Bishop of St Albans, about how this all ties in with the levelling up agenda. And there are reasons, I think, why gambling, problem gambling and poorer areas are associated. Many people in our society cannot see a way forward for themselves financially. They're trapped in low-wage jobs, zero-hours contracts. They look for hope. They look for that tiny spark of hope that something might get better. And they know the odds are terrible, but they can't see anything better. We need many more changes behind the issues we're addressing in this debate.